wins the Japanese Grand Prix.
And I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
Last time out on F1 Legends, we discussed a famous racing father, and this time we will instead be talking about a famous racing son. In the 1960s and early 1970s, the racing world was rocked by the stylish and talented Graham Hill, who won the World Championship twice, as well as the Indianapolis 500, the Le Mans 24 Hours, and 5 Monaco Grand Prix, along with other achievements. When he died in a plane crash in 1975 along with 5 other people, a legend was lost. But little did those at the time know that Graham's then 15-year-old son Damon was also a legend in waiting. It actually wasn't until Damon was in his 20s that he started racing, beginning with motorbikes and working as a dispatch rider. He transitioned to cars in 1983, moving up to British Formula 3 in 1986. After a decent couple of years where his results gradually improved, Damon really proved himself in 1988, winning at Thruxton and then again at Silverstone. That race at Silverstone was particularly notable, as he was hounded to the flag by fellow F1 drivers Gary Brabham and JJ Leto, although unfortunately I was unable to find any footage of this battle. Also beaten in this race were fellow future F1 drivers Eddie Irvine, Martin Donnelly and Roland Ratzenberger, as well as future BTCC champion Alain Menu, highlighting the vast field of talent present in British F3 at the time. Winning in this field was a surefire way to get you noticed. And noticed he was, albeit after 3 years of International Formula 3000, and eventually Damon was able to move up to the big time, Formula 1. In the early 1990s, Damon became test driver for Williams, who were entering the height of their dominance, and in 1992 he found a part-time seat for Brabham, who were, not dominant. The Brabham BT60B was outdated, slow, and so far had only managed to qualify for a single Grand Prix, but Damon changed this at his old stomping ground in Silverstone, sneaking into the field by less than 1/10 of a second. Unfortunately, this didn't change the fact that the car sucked, and Damon finished the race in 16th place, a whole 4 laps down, but the fact that he qualified the car in the first place was a feat in its own right. He then qualified again at the Hungaroring for what would be Brabham's final ever Grand Prix, before pulling the plug before the season was even finished. Luckily for Damon, Williams decided to have a complete overhaul for 1993, dropping Riccardo Patrese in his favour. The 1993 Williams was an absolute beast, being 2 seconds per lap faster than the opposition at some tracks, and being easily the most technically advanced car of its era. In just Damon's second race in the car, he set a qualifying lap less than 1/10 of a second behind his teammate Prost. After dropping behind Senna at the start, Damon quickly fought his way back past the home favourite, getting back up into second place, and when the heavens opened and Prost crashed out, Damon led the race. Unfortunately for Hill, a safety car bunched the field up, giving Senna an opportunity to shine in the wet conditions and win the race, but his efforts were still enough to grant him second position and his first ever podium in Formula 1, also moving him up to third place in the standings behind only Senna and Prost. Despite the fact that Prost was clearly the lead driver at Williams, Damon still managed to stick it to him on more than one occasion. At Prost's home Grand Prix in France, for example, it was actually Hill who took pole position ahead of his multiple world champion teammate. He then led the first 26 laps, eventually conceding the lead to Prost and then dutifully bringing home a Williams 1-2. By this point, Damon had scored 5 podiums, but the next 2 Grand Prix would be tricky for him. Mechanical failures cost him certain victories at both Silverstone and Hockenheim. This run of bad luck wouldn't last forever though. At the Hungarian Grand Prix, the latest race featured on random F1 race reviews at the time of this recording, Alain Prost stalled on the grid. This allowed Damon to take the lead into turn 1, a lead which he would never relinquish. Still practically a rookie, Damon went on to dominate the race, building up an advantage of 1 minute and 12 seconds before taking the checkered flag to become a Grand Prix winner. Some will say he was sure to win since he was driving a Williams, but trust me when I say that the Hungaroring is never easy, especially 77 laps at an average speed of 106 miles per hour. This was also the start of 3 wins on the bounce for Damon, as he also won at Spa-Francorchamps when Prost had a slow stop, and then at Monza when Prost retired with an engine failure. 1994 was an emotional season for Damon. He started the season somewhat out of the limelight due to the arrival of Ayrton Senna to Williams, but when Senna died at the San Marino Grand Prix, Damon was unexpectedly thrown into the position of team leader. At the Spanish Grand Prix, less than a month after Senna's tragic death, Damon galvanised the team with a much-needed victory. In all honesty, the real hero of this race was Michael Schumacher, who finished second despite being stuck in 5th gear, but for Williams and Hill it was a feel-good story that the whole paddock appreciated. Damon was now second in the championship, but still a whole 29 points behind Schumacher due to the Benetton driver's excellent start to the year. 2 years after first competing in his home Grand Prix, Damon Hill returned to Silverstone and beat Schumacher to pole position by just 3 thousandths of a second. However, Schumacher was feeling racy and decided to overtake Hill on the formation lap, probably attempting to play mind games with his rival. The stewards didn't like this much and awarded Michael a stop-go penalty, which he subsequently ignored, leading to a black flag, which he also ignored, leading to a very unnecessary 2-race ban. Meanwhile, Damon Hill drove a perfect race and won his home Grand Prix, making up for his heartbreaking DNF the previous year. All of a sudden, Damon found himself in with a shot of the World Championship, sitting 27 points behind Schumacher, but with Michael missing 2 races. Hill then won 3 races in a row in Belgium, Italy and Portugal, and with 3 races to go, there was just 1 point in it. Conditions at the 1994 Japanese Grand Prix were absolutely treacherous, and a red flag was shown on lap 14. The race then restarted, and as per the rules at the time, the result was to be taken from aggregate time, meaning that where you finished on the road wasn't necessarily where you would be classified. As Schumacher had been leading by 6.8 seconds before the red flag, Damon needed to finish further ahead than that at the end in order to be given the victory. It was close right up until the flag, but on the last lap Damon was able to pull out 10 seconds ahead of the Benetton, leading to Murray Walker's famous exclamation of
3.336 seconds.
as that was Damon's winning margin on aggregate. Now, it's worth noting that the 1994 season ended on quite a sour note. Going into the final round of the season, Damon needed to beat Michael Schumacher in order to win the championship. The first 34 laps were looking good for Schumacher, as he led the race from the 2 Williamses of Hill and Mansell, but then on lap 35 he made a mistake and hit the wall. At this point in time, any respectful person would have accepted that they were beaten and pulled up. However, Michael didn't do that, and the rest is history. I know it's too late now and complaining won't help, but in my personal opinion, the act of deliberately crashing into someone to win a world championship should always result in disqualification from the whole season. It is cheating, and cheaters should never win. In my opinion, Damon Hill is the rightful world champion of 1994. However you feel about 94, the fight continued in 95, with Schumacher and Hill once again the protagonists. By Hungary, Schumacher led Hill by 21 points, and the two found themselves fighting on track yet again. Damon started on pole and then put up a great defensive effort, and eventually came out on top when Schumacher's fuel pump failed. I said in my random F1 race reviews episode on this race that this may well have been Damon's greatest ever drive, because even though it ended with Schumacher retiring, it was clear that Damon had earned it, scoring pole position, fastest lap, the victory, and every lap led. His first and only Grand Chelem, and David Coulthard made it a Williams 1-2. By the time the Australian Grand Prix rolled around, the championship had already been decided in Schumacher's favour, meaning there would be no team orders between the Williams drivers. As such, David Coulthard went through to lead at the start, but later on he famously locked up a tyre and crashed on pit entry. Then one by one the others began to drop like flies. Schumacher collided with a Lacey, Berger's engine failed, Frenson's gearbox conked out, and Olivier Panis deployed a smokescreen, and eventually Damon came home to win by a whole 2 laps. I know this race win wasn't his most difficult considering the circumstances, so I was considering whether to include it in this list or not, but come on, 2 laps? That's crazy! In fact, it's the joint largest winning margin in F1 history. For 1996, Williams produced the FW18, a masterpiece of a car. Designed by Adrian Newey and Patrick Head, it provided the Williams team with virtually guaranteed results, and with Benetton losing key personnel, it seemed that the stars were aligned. Damon Hill once again led the team, but he had a brand new teammate to contend with, Indianapolis 500 winner Jacques Villeneuve. Despite technically being a rookie, Jacques hit the ground running and immediately took pole position in Australia, eventually losing out to Damon due to an oil leak. As a result, the F1 circus went to Sao Paulo well and truly aboard the Villeneuve hype train. That was, of course, until Damon came up with a devastating pole position time almost a second faster than anyone else. Damon then ran away with the race, recording the fastest lap and winning by 18 seconds over Jean Alesi as Villeneuve spun off. Damon now led the World Championship by 14 points over Alesi and Villeneuve, and he would also win 5 of the next 10 races. A scintillating championship fight between Hill and Villeneuve came right down to the wire, culminating in a decider at the Japanese Grand Prix. Hill qualified second behind a rapid Villeneuve and knew that all he had to do was stay there in order to be world champion, but that didn't stop him from making a move at the start. Honestly, I wouldn't have expected this, as I'd have probably elected to take the Nico Rosberg approach and sit behind for safety, but Damon is a racer, and so he proved here. In the end, however he performed in this race would not have mattered, since Villeneuve lost a wheel on lap 37 and retired from the race, thus confirming Hill as the world champion. Even then, Damon didn't let off, and despite a late charge by Schumacher and Hakkinen, it was Hill who came through to win, to the delight of his fans and loved ones. Murray Walker famously choked up when commentating on this. He had a real soft spot for Damon, having known him since he was a child, and having also watched his dad win world championships back in the 60s. And this also had historical significance, as the Hills were the first father and son duo ever to win the World Championship, a feat that has only been repeated once since by the Rosbergs. 1996 had been a hard-fought year, but Damon Hill and Williams emerged victorious, and rightfully so. Despite Damon's success in '96, Williams made the bizarre decision to drop him at the end of the year. He had offers to instead drive for Ferrari, Benetton or McLaren, but none of these contracts satisfied him, so instead he took the shock decision to drive for Arrows, a backmarking team who had never won a Grand Prix and who hadn't even scored a podium in over a year. Predictably, the Arrows A18 was not a competitive car, and coming into the Hungarian Grand Prix, Damon had only managed a single point. However, as you've seen already, the Hungaroring was somewhat of a special track for Damon, and in one of the drives of the century, he qualified in 3rd place, several places higher than his replacement at Williams. And this quali pace wasn't just a fluke either. After just 10 laps, Damon took the lead of the Grand Prix. It was a sensational drive, and it looked until right before the end as if he was going to achieve the impossible, but on the very last lap of the race the car slowed and Villeneuve took the win. A gutted Hill limped home, still achieving a 2nd place finish, and it was later determined that the part that had failed was a simple broken washer, worth about 50 pence. Damon failed to score another point for Arrows, and ended up in a miserable 12th place in the championship. Williams swept both titles, adding insult to injury. For 1998, Hill teamed up with Eddie Jordan, a man who had supported him in F3000, in a move that ironically saw him partnered up with Michael Schumacher's brother Ralph. The car was initially unreliable, but upgrades brought in as the year progressed turned Jordan into real contenders, with Damon putting his car 3rd on the grid at Spa. The race was extremely wet, and Hill narrowly avoided a massive first lap pile-up involving over half of the field. And it's a good thing too, because on the restart he was able to take the lead from Hakkinen, who spun and got collected. Eventually, Michael Schumacher came through to lead, until he too got involved in a crash while attempting to lap David Coulthard in the spray. With clean air and a well-handling car, Hill carried on, willing the laps away and avoiding the curves like lava pits. In the end, Damon and Ralph came through to finish 1st and 2nd, the first ever victory for Jordan and the final ever victory for Damon. Damon Hill retired at the end of a disappointing 1999 season, with his final stats boasting 115 starts, 22 Grand Prix wins and the 1996 World Championship. After retiring from F1 and racing as a whole, Hill remained involved in motorsports, and in 2006 he became president of the British Racing Drivers Club, where he helped to advocate for the interests of British motorsports and to run the Silverstone circuit. He also has other successful side ventures, such as being a part-time broadcaster with Sky Sports F1, having a brief music career, and patroning charities such as Disability Africa and the Down Syndrome Association. By all accounts, Damon is a good man, and I personally hope he continues to be involved in motorsports for many years to come. Drive safely, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.